I want to have a discussion about how we organize and structure our code. Sometimes as we start our development, we start off with a project, whether it's .NET, Python, PHP, no matter what it is, you have your application code, but then you also need to have this infrastructure code. Maybe it's Docker using for containers, and so you got a bunch of Docker files or Docker Compose files, and you need to have that kind of code also. So how do you put this all together? I think that normally we start off with a project, and we have some code base that we're starting to build, and again, it can be whatever language you want it to build in, and then along comes Docker, and we start off simple, and we have a Docker file in there. And at this point, I'm not really triggered. I feel like this is probably fine, but I still kind of notice that there's this infrastructure code, this Docker file that tells how to build the container that's going to host our code base. This infrastructure code is mixed in to our actually code directory. It's not necessarily at this level that maybe you need to make a decision, but I kind of think we want to be a little proactive. Usually this single Docker file doesn't suffice for very long. So eventually you have Docker Compose, and you're composing a bunch of Docker files, and you're building a bunch of services. As an example, I have 2 Docker starter kits, one for Laravel and one for Django, that you can see here. And, if you look at these projects, there's a Docker Compose, and in this Docker Compose, there's a bunch of services that are being built up and brought together on a single network, everything from MySQL to PHP. And in addition, there's a bunch of other files here for, Nginx. For example, I have Nginx conf, and for PHP, I got php.ini. And I don't want necessarily to stick all of these files into, this code directory. So you might say, well, maybe this is what I do next, is I put a directory and I have all my Docker, my infrastructure as a code, in this Docker directory. It's still kind of nested within my code directory. I feel like at this point now, we're mixing concerns a little bit. I would like to probably pull this out one level and put it as part of my project. So I lay in something like this. Yeah, in fact, you can see this, and as a live example, I have that Django starter kit. Here's my Docker directory, has all my infrastructure as a code, and I have a code directory that has all my application code. In this case is Python, and it's all organized under one project directory. So structuring your files in this kind of manner, with the project directory holding your infrastructure directory and your code directory, I feel like we haven't mixed our concerns anymore. In fact, I feel like now I'm in a position where maybe I could do something like this. So I can add another infrastructure directory. So imagine here's an on-prem infrastructure directory that's for developers. So this is my dev environment. And here is a Oz infrastructure directory for our cloud or maybe our production environment. And so by doing this, I have a dev and a prod environment that, I've separated, and I definitely don't want them to be kind of containerized and built up the same way. In my dev environment, I want to have, security at kind of like the minimum. I want to be able to expose all the ports. I want to be able to log directly into my database. I want to have a, self-signed certificate. So when I'm serving up web pages, it's still SSL, but it's just a self-signed certificate. No one really cares in dev environment about that. But I certainly care about those kinds of things in my prod environment. So by separating these two, I can have infrastructure as a code to build up my production environment, and I can have infrastructure as a code to build up my dev environment. And I've separated these out. I think this kind of code organization puts you in a good position to kind of support, additional types of technology. Maybe tomorrow, there is some hot technology that's going to totally replace containers. And so you want to be able to create another directory here that you can start to build your infrastructure as a code around that new technology to be able to publish or push out to production your code base. So this is where I personally have landed. I like having my application code, separate from my infrastructure as a code. So if you agree or you don't agree, or you have strong thoughts on another way of doing this, please comment below and let us know.